The coin laundromat on Birch Street smelled like warm fabric and old dryer sheets, and on Tuesday evenings it was almost always empty except for the hum of machines and the occasional clank of a zipper spinning against metal. That was why Grant Holloway came on Tuesdays. Not because Tuesday was convenient. Tuesday was actually the worst day of his week. The day his shift at the loading dock ended at 7, and his babysitter charged extra after 6:30, and his lower back ached from lifting freight containers since 5 in the morning. Tuesday was the day he always told himself he'd go straight home and fall asleep on the couch, with his shoes still on. But he never did, because by Tuesday the laundry had piled up so badly that his 7-year-old son, Brody, had started wearing his gym shorts to school, and Grant had made a promise to himself 2 years ago that Brody would never go to school looking like nobody cared. So every Tuesday, Grant loaded a black duffel bag and drove 12 minutes to Birch Street. He usually had the place to himself. A row of washers along one wall, dryers along the other, a few plastic chairs bolted to the floor in the middle, a change machine that worked about 60% of the time, fluorescent lights that buzzed just slightly too loud. Grant had stopped noticing the buzz months ago. He'd plug quarters into 2 machines, set Brody up on one of the plastic chairs with a juice box and a small tablet loaded with cartoons, and for 45 minutes he'd just sit there and breathe. Not think about rent. Not think about the overtime request his supervisor had denied. Just sit there and listen to the machines and breathe. Brody would lean against his arm and sometimes fall asleep before the first cycle was done. Those 45 minutes were the quietest part of Grant's week, and he protected them the way some men protected their fishing spots or their parking spaces. He told almost nobody about Tuesday evenings on Birch Street. The first time he saw the woman, she was standing at the change machine in a green coat that was too light for the weather, pressing the button again and again, with the particular expression of someone who already knows it isn't going to work, but can't afford to stop trying. She had a little girl with her. Maybe 4 years old, maybe 5. The girl was wearing pink rain boots with white ducks on them, and she was holding her mother's hand with both of hers. Very still, watching the machine the way children watch things they don't fully understand but somehow know are important. Grant watched them for a second, then looked back at his phone. Not his business. The woman tried a different bill. Then the same bill again, smoothed flat against her thigh. Then she exhaled slowly through her nose and looked at the ceiling the way people do when they're deciding whether to cry or not. The little girl tugged her sleeve. "Mama, is it broken?" "It's fine, baby. Just being slow. Did we bring enough quarters?" A pause that lasted just a beat too long. "We're fine." Grant looked at Brody. Brody was watching a cartoon about a talking dog and eating animal crackers from a small plastic bag and was entirely unconcerned with the rest of the world. Grant reached into his jacket pocket. He always kept a roll of quarters on Tuesdays. Had started doing it after the machine ate $6 of his money back in February. He stood up. He didn't plan a speech. He hadn't thought about what to say. He walked to the change machine, stood beside the woman, who immediately shifted her daughter slightly behind her. A small unconscious movement that Grant recognized as the body language of someone who'd learned to be careful, and held out the roll of quarters. "Machine's been eating bills for 2 weeks, he said. "Laundromat owner knows but hasn't fixed it. I always bring extra." The woman looked at the quarters, then at him. She was younger than he'd initially thought. Somewhere in her early 30s, with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of sleep could entirely fix, because that kind of tired came from somewhere deeper than just not sleeping. Her coat had a small tear near the left pocket that had been sewn back up neatly, which told him something about her without her saying a word. "I can pay you back," she said immediately. It came out fast, reflexive, like she'd said those words many times before. "Don't worry about it. I can though, I have." She opened her purse and the expression on her face shifted, just for a moment, before she closed it again. "I can get it to you before you leave." "Really?" Grant said. "Don't worry about it, I'm Grant." She hesitated. "Felicity." The little girl peered around her mother's leg. "I'm Zoe." "Hi Zoe," Grant said. "Cool boots." Zoe looked down at her boots and seemed to consider this very seriously. "They're ducks," she said. "I can see that. Ducks are waterproof. So the boots are waterproof. That's smart engineering," Grant said. Zoe nodded, satisfied, and looked back at her mother. Felicity was still holding the roll of quarters, not quite accepting them, not quite handing them back. Grant set them on top of the machine. "I'm over there," he said, nodding toward his corner. "You can just leave them on the machine when you're done if it really matters to you." He walked back to Brody, who had graduated from the cartoon to a game where a small frog jumped over logs and didn't look over again. He wasn't watching them. He was reading an old sports article on his phone and occasionally handing Brody another animal cracker, and the laundromat sounds were doing their usual thing. The rhythm of water, the low vibration of spin cycles, the tiny mechanical click every time a dryer tumbled past a certain point. Tuesday sounds. Safe sounds. But at some point he noticed that Felicity's machine wasn't running. He looked up without meaning to. She was standing at the washer sheet loaded, the lid still up, and she was staring into it the way people stare at car engines when they know something is wrong but have no idea what. Zoe was sitting on the floor beside the dryer with a small stuffed rabbit in her lap, having an extremely serious quiet conversation with it. Grant looked at the washer. Washer number 4. He knew washer number 4. Washer number 4 required you to push the dial in while turning it, otherwise it didn't catch. He'd learned that the hard way. He stood up again. That one's got a trick to it, he said, coming over. Can I? Felicity stepped back. He pushed the dial in, turned it, heard the click, pulled the knob. The machine shuddered and began to fill. There you go. Thank you, she said. And then quietly, with a kind of effort. I'm sorry. I don't usually need this much help with a laundromat. Washer 4's gotten 3 people tonight. I've been watching. She laughed, a short surprised sound, and for just a moment she looked like a completely different person. Lighter, younger, like the tiredness had lifted a few inches off her face. Then it settled back. Where are you from? Grant asked, and then immediately wondered why he'd asked that. He wasn't a talker. Tuesdays were his quiet time. Ohio originally, she said. We've been here about 5 months. We? Zo and me. She didn't elaborate and he didn't push. Some we's were complicated in ways that didn't need to be explained to a stranger in a laundromat. He went back to his corner. Brody had migrated from the chair to the floor during his absence, and was now lying on his stomach with the tablet, propped against Grant's duffel bag. Zoe from her spot by the dryer had noticed. She watched Brody with the focused intensity of a child who has spent a lot of time in the company of adults and is very interested in other children when they appear. Hi, Brody said, without looking up from the tablet. What are you playing? Not a question. A statement that expected an answer. Frog game. What does the frog do? Jumps over logs. Why? Brody finally looked up. He seemed to find this question genuinely worth considering. I don't know, he said. It just has to. Zoe appeared to accept this. She stood up, tucked her rabbit under her arm, and walked over to look at the screen. Within 2 minutes they were sitting side by side, Zoe narrating every log the frog approached, and Brody providing sound effects. And Grant looked at Felicity and found her watching them with an expression he recognized from the inside. The kind of expression you get when your kid does something that reminds you why you keep going. 40 minutes passed. The washer's finished. Grant moved his laundry to a dryer. He helped Brody drag the shirt he'd dropped across the floor because Brody had decided the floor was lava and could not be touched, which Grant played along with because it was Tuesday. And he was tired. And Brody's laugh was the best sound he'd heard all week. Felicity moved her laundry to a dryer too. She seemed to relax slightly, the way people relax when a practical task is moving forward and not presenting new complications. Zoe and Brody had moved on from the frog game to some kind of floor-based game involving the stuffed rabbit and Grant's duffel bag, and rules that changed every 30 seconds. Grant bought 2 hot chocolates from the vending machine in the back, more out of habit than anything. He always got one for Brody. And then stood there looking at the 2 cups and thought for half a second, and went back to the machine and got 2 more. He brought them over. Hot chocolate, he said, holding one out to Felicity. Machines, surprisingly decent, don't know why. She looked at the cup, her hands were tucked in her coat pockets and she pulled one out slowly. You don't have to keep, it's hot chocolate, Grant said. It's not a big deal. Brody gets cold, I get cold, it's part of the Tuesday routine. Felicity took it. Thank you, she said, and this time she said it differently than before. Not the reflexive thank you of someone managing a transaction. A quieter one. Zoe looked up from the rabbit game, with the radar of a child who has detected food-related information. Ma. Hot chocolate, I see that baby. Is there one for me? Grant held out the 4th cup. Zoe looked at her mother, who nodded, and then Zoe took it with both hands and held it very carefully and returned to the rabbit game, which was apparently compatible with hot chocolate consumption. Felicity wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at the dryers turning. I almost didn't come tonight, she said, after a moment. Not to him exactly. More to the room. Grant waited. I kept thinking I'd do it tomorrow, but we were out of everything. Zoe had one clean shirt left and it's the one she spilled paint on at school. She smiled faintly. She insists it's abstract art, not a stain. Smart kid. She is. A pause. She really is. Something in her voice when she said it. Not just pride. Something more complicated and more tired, the sound of a person who has been holding that sentence up by themselves for a long time. Grant looked at his dryer. 40 minutes on the cycle. He wasn't going anywhere. How long have you been on your own? He asked. He didn't know why he asked. He wasn't usually a person who asked. But it was Tuesday, and it was quiet, and she looked like someone who hadn't been asked anything about herself in a while. Felicity looked at him sideways, assessing. Then she seemed to make a decision. 14 months, she said. Since Zoe's father left. She said it plainly, the way you say something. You've said enough times that it no longer makes your voice shake. He didn't. It wasn't dramatic. He just stopped showing up. First, for Zoe, then for the bills, then for everything. I waited 3 months longer than I should have. Then we moved. Ohio to here. I have a cousin in the area. She was going to help us find an apartment. A beat. She tried. It didn't work out the way we planned. Grant didn't ask what that meant. He'd heard enough versions of that sentence in his own life to know it covered a lot of ground. I've been picking up shifts at a grocery store. Felicity continued. Daily counter, mostly. It's enough to keep the lights on barely. She looked down at her cup. We're in a motel right now. The extended stay one off Route 9. Grant knew the one. He'd passed it 100 times. Beige building, parking lot always half full. A sign out front that said weekly rates in red letters that had been there so long they'd faded to pink. Zoe thinks it's an adventure, Felicity said. I told her we're on a long camping trip. She tells the other kids at school she lives in a hotel, like it's fancy. She laughed softly, and this time the laugh stayed a little longer. Kids are miraculous. They really are, Grant said. He glanced over at Brody, who had now convinced Zoe to help him build a small fort using Grant's folded clean shirts, which Grant decided not to address until absolutely necessary. My son thinks folding laundry is performance art. Felicity followed his gaze and smiled. They found each other fast. Kids do. She was quiet for a moment. What about you? If you don't mind me asking. Grant considered. He didn't usually tell it, not because it was a secret but because it cost something every time, and he was careful about what he spent, but she told hers. My wife passed, he said. 2 years ago February, lung infection that moved fast. Brody was 5. He paused. We'd been a 2-person operation our whole marriage. Suddenly I was solo. He looked at his cup. I figured it out. You figure it out? You do, Felicity said quietly. You have to. They sat with that for a moment. Not an uncomfortable silence. The kind that happens when two people have said real things and don't need to immediately cover them with noise. The dryers turned. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Zoe was explaining something to Brody in a very serious whisper. Brody was nodding along with the grave attention of someone who does not entirely follow, but is committed to the effort. Felicity's dryer buzzed first. She stood and began pulling clothes out, folding them on the folding table with the practiced efficiency of someone who does everything quickly, because there is never extra time. Zoe wandered over and stationed herself beside the table and began helping, which mostly meant refolding things that were already folded. Grant's dryer buzzed a few minutes later. He and Brody packed the duffel bag, and Brody got to carry it because he was 7 and wanted to, and Grant let him drag it across the floor even though it was heavy and took twice as long. They met at the door at almost exactly the same time. Felicity had a laundry basket balanced against her hip. Zoe had the stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm and was holding her mother's hand with the other. The duck boots squeaked slightly on the linoleum. Outside it was colder than when they'd come in. The parking lot was dark except for a streetlight at the far end that cast everything in orange. Grant's truck was near the entrance. Felicity's car, a small silver sedan with a dented rear bumper, was further back under the broken light. He walked with them to it, not thinking about it. Just walking the same direction because Brody was telling Zoe something about the frog game. And they'd continued the conversation all the way through the door. Felicity unlocked the car. Zoe climbed in, still clutching the rabbit, and Grant caught a glimpse of the back seat as the door opened. A child's backpack. A folded blanket. A bag from the dollar store. The quiet evidence of a life being managed on almost nothing. He lifted Brody's duffel into the back of his truck, and when he turned around, Felicity was standing by the driver's door looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Something open in it. Something she was deciding. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. Do you know anyone who's hiring? Around here. I've been applying to a few more places but the deli hours are inconsistent, and... She stopped. Looked at the ground. I don't know why I'm asking you. You're a stranger. I work at Hadley Freight, Grant said, loading dock on Pine. They've been trying to fill a dispatch coordinator position for 2 months. It's desk work, regular hours. I don't know what your background is, but they're not being picky. He paused. Pay's not amazing but it's steady. Benefits start at 60 days. Felicity looked at him. Seriously? I can give you the name of the hiring manager. She's a straight shooter. If you go in and you're direct, she'll give you a fair shot. Felicity blinked. She pressed her lips together the way people do when they're trying to manage something their face wants to do without their permission. I was an office coordinator for 4 years, she said. Before Zoe was born. I handled scheduling, vendor calls, shipping logistics. She almost laughed. I coordinated freight for a mid-size manufacturer in Columbus. Grant stared at her. I know, she said. I know, she said again, and this time she did laugh. A real one, startled out of her, surprised by itself. I've been slicing turkey at 6 in the morning for 3 months when I have a logistics background. She shook her head. When we got here I needed income immediately, and it was the first thing I found, and then I just stayed because leaving felt like a risk and I couldn't afford a risk. You can afford this one, Grant said. Sandra Keel is the hiring manager. Tell her Grant Holloway sent you. We're not friends exactly, but she knows I don't recommend people for nothing. Felicity was quiet for a moment. The orange parking lot light caught the side of her face. She looked steadier than she had inside, like something that had been held at an angle had been set down flat. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked. It wasn't a suspicious question, it was a genuine one. The kind people ask when kindness has become unfamiliar enough that it requires an explanation. Grant thought about it honestly. When my wife died, he said, I had about 3 weeks where I couldn't function. Couldn't. Brody was 5 and I had to pack lunches and I couldn't figure out how. A woman from our street, I barely knew her, she'd waved to me maybe twice. She started leaving dinner on our porch, never knocked, never left a note, just food twice a week for 2 months, until I was back on my feet. He looked at his truck. I never paid her back. I think about it sometimes. This might be me paying someone else instead. Felicity was quiet for a long moment. I'll call about the job, she said finally. Tomorrow morning. Good. Zoe's face appeared in the car window, nose pressed against the glass, fogging it with her breath. She waved at Brody. Brody waved back. She's going to talk about Brody for the next 3 days, Felicity said. He's going to remember her boots for longer than that. Grant said. Felicity smiled. She opened the driver's door and then paused, one hand on the roof of the car. I keep thinking of something my grandmother used to say, she said. She said the nights you almost don't go somewhere are sometimes the most important nights of your life. She shook her head slightly. I almost didn't come tonight. I almost didn't either, Grant said. But the laundry was bad. She laughed. The laundry was really bad. She got in the car. He watched them pull out of the parking lot and turn left onto Birch Street, the small silver sedan disappearing past the streetlight. Brody appeared at his elbow. Did Zoe go home? She did. Is she going to be okay? Grant looked down at his son. 7 years old, with his mother's eyes and a piece of animal cracker still on his sleeve, asking the question with the plain, unguarded seriousness of a child who does not yet know that most people don't ask it. I think so, Grant said. Because of the job thing you said? You were listening to that? Brody shrugged. I was nearby. Grant put a hand on top of his son's head. Yeah, buddy. Because of the job thing. They got in the truck. The heater took a minute to warm up, the way it always did. And Brody pressed his face against the window, the way Zoe had pressed hers. The frog game started up again on the tablet, the small digital frog, making its way over its endless series of logs, for reasons that remained philosophically unclear. Grant pulled out of the parking lot and turned right on Birch. Felicity called Hadley Freight the next morning. She spoke to Sandra Keel for 11 minutes. Sandra asked about her freight coordination background and Felicity told the truth. All of it. The 4 years in Columbus, the gap for Zoe, the deli counter, the motel on Route 9. She didn't apologize for any of it. She'd learned, in the past 14 months, that apologizing for surviving was a waste of time she didn't have. Sandra offered her an interview for Thursday. Thursday came. Felicity left Zoe with the woman in the room next door at the motel who had watched Zoe twice before in exchange for Felicity's help, fixing her car window which had gotten stuck halfway down in early November. Felicity wore the blazer she'd kept at the back of her suitcase since Ohio, the one she'd bought for job interviews, and then not needed for 4 years and then needed again. She got the job. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a movie ending. It was a dispatch coordinator position, at a freight company paying a wage that, after 60 days, would come with health insurance for her and Zoe. And steady hours that would let her actually plan around Zoe's school schedule, instead of scrambling every week to cover it. It was a chance she hadn't had that morning when she'd been standing in the parking lot, wondering whether to go back inside for another turkey shift. She worked her last day at the deli counter on a Friday. The manager, who was a decent man, said he was sorry to see her go. She said she appreciated that she did. She started at Hadley on a Monday. Her desk was near the windows. Grant's locker was in the break room hallway, and sometimes in the morning they'd pass each other. And he'd ask how it was going, and she'd say fine, better, good. And that was about all the talking they needed to do about it. People who've had real conversations don't need as many small ones. She found a 2-bedroom apartment in March. 2nd floor, south-facing windows. A school 3 blocks away that Zoe tested into a grade ahead in reading. Zoe cried when they checked out of the motel because she had truly believed, the whole time, that they were on a camping trip, and the end of a camping trip always means going home. Are we going home? Zoe asked, standing on the motel walkway with her rabbit under her arm and her duck boots on. We're going to our home, Felicity said. There's a difference. Zoe thought about this. Do we have a couch? We have a couch. Does it have pillows? 3 pillow. Does the frog boy live near our home? Felicity paused. I don't know, baby. Maybe we can find out. They did find out. Brody's school was a 12-minute walk from Zoe's. On a Saturday in April, Felicity texted Grant a picture of Zoe holding a frog. A real one, found in the yard of the new apartment, small and motionless in her cupped hands with an expression of deep dignity. Grant showed the picture to Brody. Brody looked at it for a long time. Tell her the frog's name is probably Gerald, he said finally, with great confidence. Felicity relayed this to Zoe, who accepted it without question and named the frog Gerald on the spot. And released him back into the yard where he immediately jumped under a bush and was never seen again. The 4 of them had dinner that evening at a diner 2 blocks from Felicity's new apartment. Nothing fancy, booths with red vinyl seats, a laminated menu, a basket of rolls that arrived before anyone asked for them. Brody got chicken fingers. Zoe got pancakes for dinner because she'd negotiated for it. And Felicity decided it was the kind of negotiation worth losing. Grant got the meatloaf because he always got the meatloaf. Felicity got soup and a sandwich and ate every bit of it without once looking at the price. They talked about ordinary things. Brody's school project about the solar system. Zoe's conviction that Saturn's rings were made of ice cream. The broken coffee machine in the Hadley break room. That everyone had stopped reporting, because reporting it had never once resulted in it being fixed. At some point during the meal, Brody leaned over to Zoe and whispered something. And Zoe leaned back and whispered something. And they both dissolved into giggles over something that clearly did not require adult involvement. Felicity watched them, and then looked at Grant across the table. I almost didn't go that Tuesday, she said. I've thought about it so many times. I know, Grant said. If I hadn't gone, but you did. She nodded. She looked at Zoe, who was laughing with her whole face the way children laugh when they haven't yet learned to be self-conscious about it. The sound filling the booth and spilling out into the diner. And a couple nearby glanced over and smiled without knowing why, the way people always smile when they hear a child laugh like that. Felicity looked back at Grant. Thank you. She said just that. No qualifier, no elaboration. Grant picked up his fork. Don't thank me, he said. Thank the change machine. If it had been working, you'd never have needed the quarters. She laughed. He smiled. Across the table, Brody and Zoe were negotiating the last roll, which Brody had reached first but Zoe clearly felt she had a claim to, and the negotiation involved the stuffed rabbit as some sort of collateral, and it was going to take a while to resolve. Outside the diner windows, the April evening was doing what April evenings do. Taking its time, staying lighter longer than it has any right to. The sky still faintly blue at the edges well past when it should have gone dark. Sometimes that's how things change. Not because someone rode in and fixed everything. Not because the universe suddenly decided to be fair. But because a change machine broke on a Tuesday and someone happened to have quarters. And neither of them almost went but both of them did. And a 7-year-old asked if a little girl was going to be okay. And the answer turned out to be yes.